The reason why this panel exists and why I asked these guys to come and join us was because I was very curious about how this intersection between real money gaming and video games can play out. And I was curious about what are the opportunities for video game developers to work with real money operators. Is it just making games? What are the myriad ways that the video game community can work with these guys and make some money? And these are a fantastic group of people to ask just about that. So I'm going to ask each of these guys to introduce themselves. And my first question to each of you guys is, along with just the brief 30-second bio, I'm really curious about how did you first come into contact with social casino and real money gaming? What was sort of your first entry point into this myriad arena? Starting with Matt.
Matt Cullen, I'm the CEO of Semanuel Digital, which is the interactive arm of one of California's largest tribal casinos based in LA. My team's based in Northern California in the Bay Area. And we're looking at real money gaming, which obviously is our bread and butter, having a land-based casino in the state, but also social and free play gaming, which are essentially one and the same. Should I answer the question now?
Yeah, go right ahead.
I guess my first experience in social was at Betfair back in 2009 when Zynga Poker was starting to gain steam. And we decided to do a couple little trials on Facebook with some slot machines. And were pleasantly surprised at the outcome in terms of the money that we spent and the money that we were able to get out of our marketing efforts. But that was my first experience, and then went on to actually build a social casino company prior to joining Semanuel Digital.
And moving on to Rob Smith.
I'm Rob Smith. I'm working in the business and legal affairs team at Adobo. Adobo itself is a development program for real money gaming, trying to do what Facebook and iOS have done beforehand in bringing new developers into real money gaming. I first got involved in real money gaming back in 2012, actually with Adobo. So Adobo is my first foray into the sector. But before then, I've come from a legal background and also a computer science background.
I'm William Volk. I'm the Chief Creative Officer of PlayScreen. I've been in the video game industry my entire working life, formerly at Activision and other companies. We got into real money gaming and casino gaming because our Chief Technical Officer actually is a pioneer in online gambling, having helped launch one of the first online casinos in 1992, that being World Wide Web Casinos. So she is a font of knowledge. Her family's actually owned card houses and stuff, so she grew up in the casino world, and she's been our sort of driver of a lot of what we've done in real money and also with social poker. So that's basically it, yeah.
Carl?
Yes, I'm Carl Jeffrey. I'm CEO of a company called Aruga. We founded we got started rolling about 2012, doing sort of Zynga style, very casual social games on canvas. And we kind of stumbled into, as a side project, we made a slot machine, and it was making more revenue than all our great efforts for big adventure games with a lot of content. So we decided to focus on social casino, and we've developed a whole series of slot machines. And we got approached to, the quality is really high, and we've got approached by some real money guys saying you should put these out there. So that's what we've done. And there's a whole long journey from video game space to understand how the online gambling space works, the regulatory regime, there's just tons of different issues, and so we've been through the mill on that, and we're coming out the other side with our first real money slots.
All right, that's actually a good segue, just to get everyone on the same page. It's not all coming from the same backgrounds. How would you define real money gaming? What exactly is real money gaming? If you've never worked in that field, what do we mean by that?
Well, the simple thing is, if you can take money or money's worth out of the game, then it's gambling. If you're doing it just for fun, then it's not. It's what we now call social gambling, but it's really, for me, it's just a video game.
Is there any, obviously it's very different. You guys have worked in very different markets around the world. What are the different types of operators? Who is doing that? Who is running real money operations that these guys might come into contact with, might intersect with?
Well, we have a real money title in the UK with slots, scratch cards, roulette, and bingo. And the thing there is regulated. You have to understand it's a regulated market. There are actual rules that must be obeyed completely. So these games can't not have an element of skill in them. They have to be based on a random occurrence. This stuff has to actually happen on a server, not in the actual client, and a host of other rules. So you either partner with a platform provider, we did Bettable, or you basically get a license, which is, as you said, a very cumbersome thing. So, yeah.
And I think in terms of the operators, the brands you probably recognize are brands like Betfair, Bet365, William Hill, Ladbrokes.
Paddy Power. Yeah.
Paddy Power, yeah.
Yeah.
Those are the sports books that are in casinos as well.
Yeah, the sports books are very profitable, but they actually are doing very well in the casino space as well. And this is actually critical to understand, particularly in a limited market like the United Kingdom, which is saturated, in that when you go and do user acquisition, you'll be competing against companies that are very successful with budgets to match, and you'll find that you're going to be paying dearly to bring in those users.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair point. There are a lot of real money operators just focusing on casino. Again, you may have heard of some like Leo Vegas or Guts Casino. Bettable, as you've referenced before, is now moving into the B2C
Yep.
operation. So, but generally speaking, the big sports books do have a lot of other products. They have poker, sportsbook, slots. They have the casino games, and also things like bingo and Keno. And of course, you can't ignore the lottery sector. So lotteries themselves are real money operators.
It's actually, we're getting into a different sphere here. What are the different types? We've talked about sports books, the casinos, among the sort of online operators and land-based. What are the sort of different genres of real money play out there? What are the different categories of companies?
Well, you have poker, which is PokerStars and everyone else. That is a game that requires a large number of players to be in the game at any given time to succeed. You have bingo, which is interesting in that we have these games existing, and what we find is that bingo occupies most of the players' time, though it is equally small in terms of revenue compared to slots. Slots is where the money is in a real casino. Slots is where the money is in online casinos, as far as I can see. If I'm wrong, well, I'm wrong, but that's what I've seen.
What about land-based?
I hear
You've
land-
actually worked on both sides of the
Same
field.
thing. I mean, it's, I would say 60%, 70% of your revenue comes from slot machine cabinets that are actually on the casino floor, and then you've got your table games and a poker room, and if you're fortunate enough to be in Nevada, a sports book, at least in the U.S. market.
So what do you say, speaking of the market itself, the video game developers are somewhat familiar with the size and scope of the video game market, the mobile gaming market, the casual market. How big would you say the actual worldwide gambling market is? Just for putting us all on a common point of reference, what's the sort of revenue generated by the gambling industry worldwide?
Well, in online, it's about estimated to be about 47 billion for U.S. for 2015. If you look at all casinos, I think it's closer to like 180 billion for all casinos worldwide.
That's not online,
The land base is 180. The 40-something is online. That's what. That's what I saw in the statistics when I looked it up today. So.
Anyway, so we're talking about a land base, you're talking somewhere around $180 billion worldwide?
Yeah.
It's decided about, has anybody heard different numbers, or is that generally the...
Well, you can go online and see different numbers, but they all pretty converged on the whole market. That probably includes online as well, but it's a pretty large thing. I think, what's the video game industry now total? Something like 80 million for video games, or 100 million for video games. 100 billion
Depends
for
upon
video
the
games?
market, yeah.
Yeah. You have to decide with video games where we're including hardware sales as well. That makes it more complicated. Yeah.
So there's, I think
It's
there's a lot of money.
probably a fair point to make as well. Those kind of numbers are from regulated gaming. Probably can't ignore that. Still, probably a lot that happens in the unregulated territories as well, in terms of money transferring.
It's actually good. Can you describe, what do you mean by that for this crowd? What's the difference, black market, gray market? What does that mean?
Yeah, so predominantly if you're running a sports book, if you're running a casino, you, as Carl mentioned earlier on, you have to have, you're under a very regulated territory. You have to be licensed in that territory. You have to follow certain rules in terms of what you can provide in terms of your games, in terms of your products. But again, there's probably a large number of areas that don't have such regulation and essentially are a black market country where they don't allow gambling, yet there's still a demand in some of those areas for gambling products.
There's just following on with that in the U.S. alone, one of the numbers that gets tossed around in terms of sports betting specifically, it's anywhere from a 200 to 400 billion dollar industry that is completely unregulated and untaxed, which
Yeah.
is just amazing.
It boggles the mind, and also we had a large number of people playing online poker in the United States before the feds came down on that big time and shut down Full Tilt and all that. But that's a specialty game, and yet there was a tremendous amount of interest in it.
What do you think the actual, for those who don't know, first can you describe what you mean by what actually happened when, because poker in the US online was legal for a period of time, then what happened?
Well, okay, so I can go back to like the 90s when World Wide Web casinos launched in the early 90s. It was kind of legal, but eventually the Wire Act came in and the feds tightened it up. I actually was very lucky. I was privy to a meeting in Los Angeles about a year before the Full Tilt went there, and they had the online casino advisor to the Obama administration at the event, and he pulled me aside and said, "We move slowly, but we do move. We'll get our guys," and they did.
What did they, I mean, just in case people might have no idea of what we're
There was
talking
a law.
about here.
I don't know when the law was passed. It was an actual law that was passed, I think, sometime in the either in the 90s that basically said you can't do this. That's what shut down the first wave of online casinos. So like the World Web casinos and stuff, there was a law passed in the 90s that said you can't do this anymore. It's a ruling or something. And then Full Tilt and others got away with it because they were offshore, but somehow they were booking. What got them in trouble was they were booking transactions on credit cards falsely. It's sort of like, how did Al Capone get nailed? He got nailed on tax evasion. How did Full Tilt get nailed? They got really nailed because they were falsifying the credit card transactions of American credit card holders, saying they were for goods when they really were for online poker, which was illegal. Is that correct? Am I hitting it? Oh, okay,
I
fine.
was like, Matt?
Yeah,
Correct
the
me,
law
correct
was
me, correct me.
UIGEA in 2006.
2006, okay,
and
sorry. Yeah, yeah.
there were a lot of operators that were operating in the U.S. From Western Europe and the U.K. And from December 31st of 2006, before that, everybody could play online relatively easily, U.S. citizens. On that day, I would say probably 90% of the operators, regulated operators outside the U.S., pulled out of the U.S. market. And some that remained found themselves in a little bit of trouble in what was called Black Friday in April of 2011.
And what actually occurred on Black Friday, just because they might not have any idea what that actually
The federal
happened on that
government
day?
seized the domains of those operators that continue to operate in the U.S. market. So if you went to those websites, Full Tilt, PokerStars were probably the biggest, most talked about. You saw a big federal seal of the Department of Justice when you went to the website to try and go play a poker game.
I think that sort of brings,
Thank you for
into
correcting me.
just clear focus the fact that this is a regulated market and the governments are directly involved in oversight of what occurs. Since Black Friday, has the poker market in the U.S. gone away?
Well, I believe they're doing it in Nevada, right? There's a company in Nevada operating an online poker game when you're in Nevada itself.
I know that's legal. I'm sort of saying poker was outlawed, but did it stop, or has things just moved into the black market?
I don't know if people are using VPNs or whatever to play online poker. I don't have knowledge of that. Does anyone know if that's happening? Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely people playing offshore. I mean, just you continue to do it. In most states, it's not illegal for a citizen of that state to actually play offshore. It's illegal for companies to take the gameplay from those players in the U.S., but it's still very rampant. I mean, we only have 3 states in the U.S. right now: Delaware, New Jersey, and Nevada, where online gaming is legal. So that's 47 other states that people have to go to a casino, a physical casino, to play, or they can play offshore. They can still do it.
Speaking of just moving out, because we have people from all over the world just moving outside of the U.S., you guys have experience around the world in a lot of different markets. So what are you most excited about? What are you looking at around the world, whether it's South America, Europe, Asia, China? What markets are you looking at this year and in the years to come?
I'll go first. Adobo itself is a platform provider, so we're working with a number of licensed operators in each of the different territories around the world. At the moment, our focus is within Europe, which is probably where a lot of people's focus is going to be at the moment. And even within Europe, there's still a number of different countries there that have not yet opened up regulation. So from our point of view, UK is probably one of the bigger markets. But we're also quite excited this year about Spain. So recently Spain opened up for slots games. Again, as I said, slots is a large revenue growth. So Spanish market is going to be good. And also the Eastern European markets. We're looking at the countries that are opening regulation within Eastern Europe, because again, they present quite a good opportunity for both operators and then of course for our developers.
On the platform side, we've done a native iOS app, but we're actually really excited about the ability to actually launch HTML versions of some of the stuff we've done, and partnering with companies like Adobe to get distribution on that, because having a situation like Adobe is cool because basically the marketing is handled, and marketing is a real difficult thing in this industry, way underestimated.
Are you working in Asia or China?
Well, wherever we can find a partner that actually has the ability to sell stuff. I don't want to go off and directly try to license stuff. China's interesting because the Chinese culturally are totally into gambling. I mean, probably as much as any culture on the planet, but there's nothing happening above the ground yet. So yeah, it's really up to the Chinese government. When the Chinese government decides to do something, they'll probably control the show, but it could be like I believe the Shanghai stock market is sort of like it has probably some of the highest PE ratios in the world, mainly because people use that as a sort of substitute for a casino. At least that's the story I've been read. So look that up for yourself and see what's going on there. But I was told to look into that myself.
Okay. Anybody moving into South America?
Well, who's licensed there? You know.
Not on the screen. Oh. Another microphone into the fray.
Again, we're speaking to South American operators, but again, the way that Adobo works is always on the basis that we're integrating our platform, and then it's the operator that is operating under their license. So it's always the obligations for the operator to work in the legally compliant way. So we're looking at the market, but again, we're kind of in the stage where we're trying to do a lot of things, and again, all these markets are opening up, and you've got to really focus on the markets that you want to hit.
All right.
As far as Samuel Digital, we're very focused on trying to get a law passed in California to allow for online poker legally in the state. We have a partnership with Amaya Poker Stars and are working very hard in Sacramento to try and get a bill in front of the governor for him to sign. Aside from that, I would say other areas for us is definitely social casino. That whole self-regulated area is very intriguing. One that continues to grow, and one that we want to be a player in at some point in time, globally.
You just mentioned legislation before we separate to another topic. There was just another bill introduced in the U.S. Senate to reinstate UGIA. Any thoughts on the likelihood of the U.S. Senate banning online gaming entirely again?
What do you mean again? I don't understand. You mean to do more than the current law did in 2006, or?
No, it's they're trying to reinstitute the Wire Act. So as part of that stuff that happened in 2011 when they shut down those sites and tried to get the unregulated operators out of the U.S. market, they tweaked the Wire Act to allow for certain games to be played online and to allow for certain payments to be processed online. And what's happening is a very large casino operator and owner and very rich individual is trying to reinstate the Wire Act as it used to be written to prevent any form of online gaming in the U.S. And so there is a bill that got introduced, as Jameson said 2 days ago, and there was some work that was done in the fourth quarter of last year in the lame duck session as well, but it didn't go anywhere, so they're back at it again. We're adamantly opposed to it for obvious reasons.
Yeah, and a curious twist of fate, my wife's family is friends with that man, so makes for very interesting Thanksgiving discussions, let me just put it that way.
Well, spinning into, to talk directly to some of the guys here, for video game guys who are at Casual Connect, working with video game companies, making their own games, selling their services to video game companies, be it whatever payment processing, be it art outsourcing, be it distributed development teams. What are the skill sets, and what do you think the guys in the video game community can bring into the real money space? What can they bring to the table to sell you and to work with you and the other companies in the real money field?
Well, does anyone want to take that on first? All right,
Dive in.
here's the thing. You know, real money gamblers are real money gamblers, and they have certain needs and wants and cares. But what video game people can do, particularly in games like bingo and stuff, is they can apply video game mechanics to make interesting games, which is the approach we did. It's sort of a little bit of my involvement and Sherry's involvement in this. We took game mechanics from things like candy games or football games, soccer games, and we threw that into a bingo mix and yet maintain the legitimacy of the game in terms of regulation. So that's what they could bring. They can bring interesting game mechanics. But once again, as stated before, slots are going to be where the money is. So then what they can bring in is great graphics, great effects, understanding what's exciting to players, but you have to bring in people who understand real money. Even the pay tables alone are a very sophisticated art, because it's not just how much money goes back to the players, it's volatility, it's surprise, it's the bonus games, once again, can be very exciting as well, so it's a collaborative effort.
Anybody else?
Yes, it's quite on prima facie, it looks like you look at a slot machine as a video game developer and you think, you know, how easy would that be? You know, it's a small amount of graphics, some reels, there's not much going on, and then, you know, a couple of years later you realize, well, you know, you can't directly, because of the way it's all run off math and par sheets, you can't directly affect the gameplay. You can't, you know, in a video game, if your main character is jumping too high, you just adjust the physics and knock it back. But if your video game's paying, your slot machine's paying out too much, you've got to get into the reels and adjust the reels and simulate it millions of times, try it again, try again, try again. One of the problems in real money, as opposed to social, with social, we operate an MVP model. We as soon as we've got a machine to a basic standard, we'll put it up on Facebook, get some data back, see if people like it, tweak it. No one gets hurt. Sometimes we've had times where we've had made an error in the par sheets. We've had massive RTPs, people making 1 trillion coins or whatever, and no one gets hurt, least of all us. But then you go to real money, and suddenly, well, one, it's regulated. You've got to go through an expensive certification procedure before you're able to release your game. And there's certain things you can and can't do. You can't basically cheat the player. You have to have a fixed math model. And where you end up with is, rather than doing a sort of iterative, the sort of more modern iterative agile development, you really have to develop the whole thing to a complete finished standard, test it for security, test it for, you know, to a much higher level than you would a video game, test it for all of the outputs, the RT, return to player, the percentage return to player, and then certify it. And then, because of all the cost of doing that, it's pretty much locked. That game's going to be like that until you rework it or do a new edition. So it seems very similar. It's actually, apart from making graphics, there doesn't seem to be, to me now, much relationship between video games and slot machines.
Mm-hmm.
One thing you can do is you can create the illusion of player control. So in the bingo games, the numbers are already picked up on the server. The cards are already set. The numbers that you're going to get are picked up already on the server. They have to be. But you can create the illusion. What we did is create the illusion of control by having people play a candies game and having their actions reveal the numbers. It creates that feeling that I'm actually controlling the outcome, but you're not at all. And that's a good thing, actually. And there's some slot games where people have done things of timing and stuff that give you, once again, that illusion that you're actually controlling the slots, but you're not really controlling it. Like a stop button is a typical thing you'll see. The slots are spinning, and you have a button that you can hit stop at any time, and it'll stop it, and you think you can control the outcome by doing that, but you're not. Right?
I think there is a hell of a lot in there in terms of game design, in terms of building a gambling game. As Carl mentioned, you can kind of work on an agile approach with social games, with casual games, with, to a certain degree, video games. You can ship it in a gold state. Actually, day one, you can have a number of bug fixes which get downloaded. The build is going to be locked, and even when you've got the build locked, even when you've checked the game itself and all the numbers are working and all the RTPs are working, you have absolutely no idea whether that game is going to be successful. Yeah. Because there's so many different factors that influence the success of a slot game, and games that you would look at on one of the online casinos today, they look probably up to face value to most people in this room, and certainly the type of developers that you'd be looking at from Casual Connect, they wouldn't look like successful games, but actually they're some of the best playing games and some of the greatest revenue earners. So it's not a case of just getting one game and sticking it out and thinking it's going to make money. You probably have to have a portfolio of content, of which maybe 90% of it will be average in terms of revenue growth, and you may have one star that comes in that.
And there's not much crossover between social players and real money players in the UK, as an example. There just simply isn't. They're not the same people.
How do you think the rise of mobile games, and actually the rise of game players, the rise of just gaming as a entertainment activity that hundreds of millions of people play? I mean, I saw a number recently that said 280 million people in the US have a smartphone and play games. Has that impacted the design of games in casinos in the land-based world? The expectations of players playing online? Has Candy Crush somehow impacted the design of the slots in casinos?
Impacted us, but yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's starting to. And I think the, what we're seeing right now is the aging demographic, at least in the US market, that are playing slot machines are aging and dying off in some ways. And the next generation of casino games, style games, and the way that you access those games and play those games is changing. All the way from being within the casino in a lounge playing on an iPad, a slot machine, an RNG-based slot machine that just like you would play some of Adobo's content online today. It's not everywhere yet, but it's definitely starting to cater to that younger generation or younger generations.
Yeah, from the operators that we're working with, we're getting the feedback that actually now they're looking for kind of casual game style quality in terms of animation, in terms of art, in terms of presentation, particle effects, and so on. And also they're looking for innovative content. So like we're talking about a match 3 type game, you can turn a match 3 mechanic into a regulated game.
Yep.
We're working with one developer at the moment. We've done an IP deal with one developer called Playdemic in England, who have a social casual game called Gourmet Ranch. Our development team internally has worked with them to create a 5x5 isometric game, which is essentially, again, it's a matching game, but we call it a harvest game. And it still has the underlying principles of a slot underneath, but actually, to look at it on face value, it's a very, very different game, and you wouldn't think it's a slot to look at it. And I've just come back from the ICE exhibition in London, and it's getting a lot of good feedback.
That's interesting. Looking down, Carl, did you have something to add? The speed of innovation is one thing that people talk a lot about. The video game space obviously innovates quite quickly. One thing that's always been described about the regulated industry is that innovation moves at the speed of regulation. And I wonder, is that true? What are the difficulties of innovating? Can innovation, the types of innovations and the iterative speed of the video game industry, can that drive cycles on the regulated side faster? Or is it just going to be step by step, slow and plodding? Or are we going to see things actually speed up in terms of the types of games you're exploring now? Are we going to see more and more of that in the years to come?
I definitely believe so, and I think a lot of, again, if you're relatively new to the sector, you kind of see the technical requirements in terms of what you have to do in game design. But there's nothing stopping you from, if you have a new idea of a game you want to build, there's nothing stopping you from approaching the regulators themselves and getting them comfortable with the design that you're trying to make. So I think there is a bit of a disconnect in terms of engagement between the developers and, to a certain degree, sort of the platforms and the regulator. But I think from every conversation I've had with the regulator, they always seem open to new ideas. They're looking for new innovation they can bring to the sector, certainly within Europe and the markets we're working in. And again, it's just getting them comfortable with what it is you're trying to do and showing them that you can still have the elements of luck in the game, showing them that the game still pays out in the same way that you're expecting it to, and also most importantly, in showing them that these kind of player protection principles are applied to that game.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say my own sort of personal view is that the innovation over the next at least 3 years, I believe, is going to come from smaller companies, smaller developers, not the big suppliers to the land-based or online industries today. There's been so much consolidation on that side of the business, with the big companies being bought by bigger companies, and I think over the next 2-3 years, they're going to be trying to figure out, how they structure their businesses and what they cut and what they keep and they don't keep. And I just don't see any innovation coming from there. I think it's going to be small companies like Adobo and others that that are going to lead the way there. I think it's a fantastic time to have a startup in terms of content creation in this industry. I think there's a huge opportunity there.
I think even if you live with the current model, like a slots game or a bingo game, there's a tremendous amount you can do to actually create a game that doesn't look like slots or doesn't look like normal bingo. I've seen battleship games that are Keno games. I've seen sports games that are actually slots games, and so this is definitely possible. And even though the regulations are there, it doesn't actually constrain you in terms of creativity whatsoever. And I agree that the small companies are going to come up with very different and strange stuff. And what's good about that is that it actually keeps people in the game, even if they're not spending as much in that game. That game may actually be the reason why they come back to your game, because you have that innovative bingo game or that innovative sports game that happens to be a slots game underneath it.
Same time, what we've tried quite a lot of innovation, because you can in social, you can just try things. And one thing we have found is that gamblers seem to be quite traditional in their outlook. If you put a sixth reel on the slot, or
yeah, that's true,
sideways or something, it might be logically the same game with the same odds, but I'm sure there's exceptions. Sure, someone's going to come up with something really innovative, but if you stray too far, I mean, roulette with half the numbers isn't roulette, right? So you are constrained, but then that's an argument for more creativity. If there's constraints, within those constraints, you need to innovate within it.
And what we found was that players are spending most of their time in the sort of weird, innovative games, but most of the money was coming in from slots. So no surprise.
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be incremental steps if you want to do something new. It's not just necessarily kind of the platforms or your own game design or the regulators, also the operators. They don't necessarily want to go from their traditional product straight away to something completely avant-garde immediately, because of the risk of either cannibalizing their players or churning the players off to another operator, because the content that those typical players want are being offered elsewhere. And of course, this operator is now providing new innovative content that to a certain degree is not what their core players want. So there's a lot of things that you've got to balance in terms of creating a new type of game. So again, at Adobo, we kind of have a mix of probably about 50 or 60% of our portfolio is traditional style content, but very good, very new, very nice content. And then also we have a probably about 40% which is trying to inject new, innovative content to the industry.
That's fair. So sounds like there's a general concept of the opportunity to innovate, and for smaller companies especially to move into the space to test some new things in an innovative way. Given that, you also mentioned being innovative within a box, and that box to some degree being the regulatory, the licensing, and all the subsequent issues that go along with it. What are the challenges that would present anybody here or casual game developers from moving into this space, either on their own or by finding a partner such as yourself or any of the others? What are the pros and cons of going either of those roads?
Well, trying to go alone, I think, is going to be a very hard slog. And the reasons are that there's so many different barriers to entry. Operators necessarily want to see content that's coming from a trusted partner. And they also, every single time that you want to get your game to an operator, you have to integrate through one of the existing layers of technology that they already have in their system. So operators are tied in terms of the number of integrations of new products they can put into their game, unless there's already a pre-existing channel there. So already you're trying to sell an operator a new game developer, a new game concept through a new marketing route and through a new integration route, and it's going to be a hard sell unless you've got something very, very special. So I would say that choosing a partner is the best way, certainly if you're starting out, because you're probably going to learn a lot from how the cycle works and how the industry works straight away. And again, companies like Adobo are probably a good partner to go with, and especially if you're trying to do something new and trying to have as little barriers of entry at all, trying to get into the sector.
A lot of companies went on to the platform we're on, and a lot of them backed out from it. And the reason is that in many cases they were amazingly great game companies, but they just didn't have the background and real money. But the other thing is that we're talking about, in the UK, for example, an extremely mature market with extremely robust competition, great companies that know their audience really well. And you have to be realistic about what your chances are. So if you basically pay attention to what's going on, iterate your product, make it as good as possible, and do the best job marketing, you have a business there. But I think that going with a partner that actually has that marketing tied into it, like Adobo, it makes a lot of sense for most. I think it makes a lot of sense. Period.
So I can probably save everybody a lot of time. We spent 2 years learning about real money gambling, looking at all the legislation, meeting with the Gambling Commission, looking at technologies, looking at security servers. Went on and on. We spent quite a bit doing that. We got to a point where we had a plan where we were going to apply for our own UK gambling license, which even that's not enough. Pretty much now it's moving towards having a gambling license in every territory you're going to operate in. And then looking at the bill, $3 or $4 million to start to put your first slot machine out. And well, there may be people out there who are more ballsy, deeper pockets, but for us, we reversed out of that, came back and said, look, who can we partner with who's already got all that infrastructure, remote gaming server, license, and can help us with marketing distribution. Distribution is probably as important as all that technology stuff, because you can make the best, like with a regular video game, if you make the best slot machine or whatever bingo game in the world, if you can't get it in front of people, then you're not going to make any money. So we went with Better Will originally. There's various reasons why I don't think they're a good option. We've looked at all the options out there, well, pretty much all we could find, and we've settled with Adobo, so that's who we're going to work with.
Talking about the content, looking at the differences both in slots and tape and poker, you guys heavily focused on like poker in California. What are the differences from the types of content that some of the game developers may have made in terms of focus on social casino, poker, and slots? If they wanted to take some of their products and bring it in, if I had an amazing poker game, I was like, man, I want to show this poker game to you. You guys should take this into the real money sphere. What are the design challenges between coming out of the social sphere and then trying to take either a social slots or a social poker game and move it into a real money space?
Well, I don't know how I can say this without getting in trouble, but I will say it anyway. A lot of the social poker games play a little bit fast and loose with player retention by giving players who come back after a certain amount of time away from the game really good hands. This is what I've been told, and you can't do that in a real money game. You got to play completely legit, And in fact, we did a social poker game, and we played it legit. And I think in some ways that actually probably hurt us a little bit, because the retention plays that people are doing in the social poker space make a difference. I haven't played the poker game in a while. I come back to it, and oh my God, I got a flush, I've got a straight. Isn't that awesome? And sometimes that's happening algorithmically, at least according to some of the people I know. Now, if I'm not going to name names, and if you want to yell at me about it, that's fine. But I've heard this is the case. And also, poker requires liquidity. You have to have a lot of players in the game to make it worthwhile. I would not recommend going into real money poker at this time because of that. It's just too competitive, and the companies in there have the players. It would be very hard. But if you're tied to a land-based casino, then it's another story, because you have people already in the casino. So, yeah.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, one of the things that sort of the social casino developers are doing very well, again, it's been said a few times already, but art and animation, the kind of the makeup of the front end of the client, making it look really nice, making it look really appealing to players, and also they do things very well like win enforcement. So when you're winning on your slot machine, you have coins flying out of the slot machine, and you have really good animation, and it really makes you feel like you're winning something big in terms of the social casino. I think there's a lot of mechanics in social casino that can be pulled over into real money. In-app purchases, as you do in social casino, is something that's not really been done in real money. You can do it in the regulation, or you can do it as a meta game. So you've got your slot game, but then you've got another meta game on top of it, which actually isn't tied to the slot logic, and you can do a lot within the meta game as well, which is an interesting area that I think we're going to see a few new slot games come into upcoming. So again, there is the demand for innovation. There's the demand for new products. It's just you have to be you have to take baby steps in terms of introducing new concepts into the real money sector.
Right.
Again, the players are very different in real money than they are in the social sector.
And there's regulations on that. So we added a metagame with a map of progress and all that, giving people rewards and actual cash rewards for coming back to the game. But you have to do that on the basis of this repeat play, not coming back the same day or next day, because that violates the rules. really deep research you have to do on this, because you can easily run afoul of the rules if you try to play clever games. You know, like if you come back 5 days in a row, we're going to give you £5. You can't do that. That's absolutely not allowed.
Okay, Jim, just a few more questions, and we'll open up and see if there are any questions from the audience.
Sorry, James, on one point,
Sure.
you said before that skill games weren't allowed. You can actually do skill games in some games.
Yes, you can do skill games
But-
in some games, and poker is semi-skill in a way.
But in terms of the slot games, you could do a skill game as a bonus game, per se. So we saw one slot game where you had the
Cool.
traditional slot game, and then you went into a bonus game from the slot, and it was essentially an Angry Birds style bonus game. We actually found that some of the operators didn't like that because you're spending a good few minutes in the bonus game when actually they wanted you to be back into the base game spending money. So why were they putting you out front of house with a game where you're not actually going to spend that much money as you would do than a slot game that was just going through a spin every 4 or 5 seconds? So there's a whole other layer of things that you've got to consider about in terms of real money gaming.
So do you ask the game developers to change the game dynamic when you're moving over from one?
We do, yes. So the way we work is that developers that come to us, we will get their concepts up in essentially our sales book, and we'll invite feedback from the operators. And the operators will look at demos, they'll look at videos, they'll look at concepts, and they'll give feedback. And of course, you're not going to want a developer to go through the rigmarole of building a game if actually at the other end nobody's going to take it. So usually the feedback is taken on board.
It's one of the smartest things I think Adobe did was that. It's a brilliant idea.
That question, because you've been in online gaming and now with the social gaming platform, and these guys are talking about the front end component of like the differences. If you talk a little bit about the platform and the importance of the platform and real money platforms versus social.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the biggest difference is most of the social platforms are bespoke platforms that the operators, if you will, have built themselves, the developers have built themselves. Typically, there's bits and pieces that they might get from third parties. Typically in the real money space, you're integrating with a platform that someone else is supplying to you. An online platform in most cases, if you're an online operator. I think those are probably the biggest differences. Well, you know, most of the social stuff is homegrown and built in-house.
Oh, it also needs to be said that on mobile, Google won't let you do native games that are real money gaming. So to handle those devices, you'll have to go to HTML.
Speaking of platforms and such, one of the things that has popped up a lot of bunch of different conventions recently on both sides of the space, social and real money, is VR. And I wanted to ask your opinion on the sort of evolution of VR and the games that are being built in VR. I've seen a lot of demos for virtual reality casinos and virtual reality slots. What do you think? How is the evolution of VR going to impact anything? Is this going to pop up on the casino floor?
Well, just coincidentally, we've just got the Samsung VR in-house, and we put our Android slots up on it with a full wraparound slots experience. So you can't, there's no escaping it. It's quite spooky. If you're into slots, it's quite immersive anyway and addictive. But with a headset on, it's full sort of 180-degree view. But in terms of, I mean, one thing we're always coming up with ideas. Could we do a full multiplayer virtual reality casino? So you're wandering around, because a lot of the experience in a real casino is social, right? So you're playing craps, you're chatting with other people and sharing the experience, and that doesn't really come through to a large degree in social casino games at the moment, particularly on Facebook games, where they tend to be sort of asymmetric rather than real-time full multiplayer games. So, but we have to have an installed base first, right?
So is that you're saying Aruga's about to launch a virtual reality casino?
No, Murray down there runs development, but he's looking at me going. But no, we've toyed with the idea. We've been kicking around what could we do with virtual reality, but the installed base isn't there yet. But I'm hopeful this time around. I mean, there's been another, as you know, a couple of runs at virtual reality before that haven't really come to fruition. But the devices are better this time and they're cheaper. So,
Any other thoughts from you guys?
Well, related, I know that one company in Germany, Handy Games, has a watch slots game that runs on an Android watch, and what they've done is they built a social slots game that runs on the watch that has a mechanism where you actually gain more virtual currency by exercising, which is kind of clever. So, yeah.
Again, coming from the ICE exhibition, I saw a number of from the very small amount of time I had to walk the floor, a couple of the Oculus units, a lot of them were doing it in poker, and there's a few doing it in slots. Poker, I'm not sure how that's going to fit in. If you're doing poker well, you need to be multi-tabling, sort of 50, 60 hands of poker at a time, and I can't see how that's going to work in an Oculus VR unit. But the slots was an enjoyable experience. I don't think it's going to be a big market. I think it's going to be very niche. But the idea of playing your slot machine, and when you get the win, you have this volcano perhaps behind you that's exploding, you have coins sort of flying around above your head. It made for quite a nice experience. I can see that being quite a very niche product, but still definitely a market for it.
All right.
Sounds cool.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, I've just seen several startups like that. I mean, the games seem to be pretty immersive, particularly the Oculus, on the games on that platform. But I haven't seen anyone break out in terms of really making a lot of money or garnering a huge audience yet.
Okay.
It's a good way to raise money, though.
Are there any questions from the audience right now before we have one last round right there?
We did. My former company did that. We started off in that space. It's. I think part of the reason that it's tough to do. It's a great retention tool. Players keep coming back into the game. It's extremely difficult and challenging to monetize them. Plus, the games are. Sports betting to me is it's not a game. It really is an activity more than anything. Whereas poker clearly is a game. Slots are a game, but it's sort of an activity as well, because you're sitting there spinning and going off in your own little world, watching the reels and listening to the music. But I think that was the toughest thing for us, was just monetizing the players when they came in. And you have to build up a lot of volume in order to keep people around and try and monetize them. So you have to have in-play betting as well, which is not the easiest thing to do.
I have a question for you. It's possible that, because there have been a lot of people who try the social sports betting a lot. Is it possible part of it is because fantasy is so big and that's taken up a large portion of the players? Or?
I think in the States it probably is, but I think, particularly if you think about Europe, I mean, why play a social sports betting game when I can do the real thing, which you can pretty much do most everywhere now?
Again, we only work in the casino sector, so we don't work in the sports book, but we've had developers come through with, again, fixed odds, fantasy style games. And again, I think there is a market for them, but a very, very small one for the same reason. Why would you want to be betting on something where actually truly it's luck underneath, when you can actually do the real thing, where you feel that you have an interest in the game, where you feel you have a better knowledge on the result?
Okay, we're going to have to wind up in a second. We want any last questions from this audience? All right, I'll ask each of you guys just to finish up really quickly. Just from your own vantage point, what do you want to see happen in this space in the next year? What are you most excited about? What are you hoping that your company gets to do in the next 24 months?
Well, real money, I think, this definitely feels like there's a move from, towards more regulated markets, more markets coming on stream over time. And of course, once you've put the money in to develop your content, every time a market opens up, there's a new opportunity. So it's really about, seeing new distribution opportunities coming on stream.
Okay, Bill?
I think the new markets are really critical in opening up the territory, so we're in, blue oceans rather than red oceans. We actually have a chance to actually go into a new market and be fresh, and rather than going against companies that have been there for years in advance. And I also think for us, the big thing is expanding beyond just the iOS native stuff and bringing in our experience in HTML5 and building HTML apps that can actually hit more platforms and so on.
Rob?
From our point of view, and one of the reasons that Adobo started was because the kind of the Angry Birds from the Apple store has not yet been found in our sector. I think there is that one game that's out there that is very innovative and is going to just blow everything else away. So I'm excited about that coming through. As a wider point on real money gaming, I'm also quite excited about how esports are going to impact the sector, and how kind of when we start seeing the first proper sports book along esports and so on. I think that'll be exciting.
Okay. Matt?
I'd like to see a law passed in California to allow for
Yeah.
legal online poker. It's a pretty big
That would be
focus of
good.
mine.
Okay, so we've got new markets, new games, new legislation. It's a good mix. And we're going to close it. So I will just say thank you very much to this panel for coming here this morning and joining everybody. Thank you guys all for coming. And there's a lot of additional content coming up today. So thank you all very much for being here, and we'll see you later on.